Well, good morning all. I trust that you're all well. Sorry I can't be with you this morning, but due to much needed holidays and a variety of diary clashes, it wasn't possible to have a live sermon today. So this is a very interim, flexible solution, but apologies for the pre-recorded nature of this morning's reflection. Our reading today is from John, the Gospel of John, chapter 11. So reading from verses 1 to 53. So it's quite long, but it's a very rich passage, and hopefully we'll all get something new from reading it together and reflecting on it. Okay. So John chapter 11, verse 1. Now a man named Lazarus was ill. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So this Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay ill, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is ill." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This illness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by the world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is come into the world." After she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odour, for he has been there 4 days. Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth round his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we accomplishing? They asked. Here is this man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up. You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish. He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. So here we have a very detailed storyline, lots and lots of information in this, lots of wonderful conversations. We have some knowledge given to us on characters and some hints of what's about to come later on in the Gospel of John. Some wonderful movements, some declarations, some metaphors, some irony. There's a whole mixture of different things in this story. If we take a brief walk through, we do get an idea of where this story is going. When in verse 4, Jesus states that this illness will not end in death and that it is for God's glory. So we get a glimpse of what might be coming down the road. We get a further insight that Lazarus, Martha and Mary are all known by Jesus, even though they haven't been mentioned before in the Gospel of John. We see in verse 5 that Jesus loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. John also refers in verse 2 to this earlier encounter that he's had with Mary, despite the fact that actually when you look at the Gospel of John, the encounter with Mary and Mary wiping Jesus' feet with her hair doesn't come until chapter 12, so the chapter that follows this story. But that story is probably fits better with the structure of John, which isn't chronological but is building and is set in two main themes as we'll flesh out in a minute. And we also have a laboured point about Jesus not wanting to go too quickly to Bethany. Jesus deliberately holds back, which leads to the questioning in the statements by Martha and Mary. If only you'd been here. If only you'd been here, our brother would not have died. It's also the emphasis that Lazarus has now been dead for 4 days. He's been in the tomb for 4 days. So what's going on with the 4 days? Is this to show that Lazarus is really, really dead? He's not just asleep? Some of the early thinking of first century Jews had this thought, or so commentators say, that the spirit was still not fully gone from the body until 3 days. So maybe this 4 days emphasis is the fact to emphasize that Lazarus was in fact really dead. But the underlying implication from Martha and Mary's conversation with Jesus is, where were you when we needed you? It's indeed a question that is raised by some of the Jews that are around at the tomb, who in verse 37 are asking, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Jesus doesn't explain himself away, but rather gives some amazing statements to Martha, such as, your brother will rise again. And that famous statement that's right in the middle of the section, which says, I am the resurrection and the life. Martha, on the other hand, she doesn't quite get it. She doesn't quite get what's about to happen. Even at the tomb, she's still worried about the smell of the decomposition of the body, given the time frame since Lazarus was buried. Other wonderful details that we have in this story is we have that conversation with the disciples, showing that they don't get it either. There's a repetition of John's themes of light and contrasted with stumbling when you have no light. There is also the explanation to the disciples about wakening up Lazarus, but they fail to really grasp that Lazarus is actually dead. Even though Jesus had told Martha and the disciples what would happen, I still don't think any of them, in fact anybody, they are expected to see what was described in verse 44, which is the dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. A sign that was so amazing that many of those Jews who had come to visit Mary, as verse 45 says, put their faith in him, that is Jesus. But as one death story was coming to a happy ending, another death story was about to be birthed. It's hinted in verse 8, verse 16, that the danger was really real for Jesus. But by verse 53, it is really at its boiling point. We could spend hours, but I know we don't have the time this morning. It'd probably be a study that you could do for weeks and weeks on end. But really what I want to do in this next 5 minutes is really just look at the structure of the Gospel of John and what it's aiming to do, and then 2 points from this passage that we can hopefully take away today and hopefully impact our week as we go through it this week. So firstly, the structure of John. So some commentators have split the structure of John's Gospel really into 2 parts. So we have Jesus's ministry and signs as they're described through chapters 1 to 12. So in this story we're getting towards the end of that first section, and then the second part of the gospel is all about Jesus's hour, and the hour is at hand and the hour has now come, which is chapters 13 through to 21, including the aftermath of the hour. So the signs begin in chapter 2 with the wedding at Cana, and it is referenced as being the first sign. The second sign is also referenced and numbered, and that's the healing of the royal official's son in chapter 4. After that, the numbering falls away, so you now have your homework to do, which is to go away and find where sign is referenced and try and piece together the other signs that lead us all the way to chapter 11. And this sign, which could be the last sign, if you like, in this section of John, before the transition starts towards Jesus's hour or Jesus's passion. So in this section, actually, you get that transition which is starting to come through with that verse 53, which is the prophecy or the plot of the religious authorities, which start to focus on killing Jesus, and the prophecy of the high priest that was made in verses 49 and 50. So we have the signs and the hour, so we're in the sign section. So what is John's aim about talking about these signs or picking these signs to talk about? Because there are lots of signs, but he's picked 6 or 7, depending on how you want to number them. And all the signs have a purpose according to John, and that purpose is explained in John chapter 20. So at the end of John's Gospel, John chapter 20 verse 31, it says that these signs are so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that you may have life. So in the middle section of this story, actually, we see Martha declaring this as well. So in verse 27, Jesus is acclaimed as being the Messiah or the Christ and the Son of God. So life actually is a big theme for John. So we see I am the resurrection and the life. But life is actually used 5 times more in John's Gospel. Life as a noun is used 5 times more in John's Gospel than it is in the other 3 Gospels combined. So Jesus has come to give life, abundant life. He's the resurrection and the life. And we have that great I am statement, which is in verse 25. So the aim of the signs is to point towards Jesus. Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the Son of God. Here are the signs to demonstrate that Jesus is the Messiah. So that's it for the structure. But what can we say about this passage that we can carry into this week, or we can carry forward even further than this week? I suppose the 2 main points. The first point for me is that we see Jesus who willingly enters into the suffering and the grieving. He's impacted by the grief that his friends, that the other Jews, the people around the death of Lazarus are experiencing. Jesus enters into the messiness of what life brings, and he enters in with compassion, with empathy, with patience. There is a grief, there's weeping, there's mourning, people in the house, people at the tomb, people following Mary who were comforting her. But the divinity and the humanity of Jesus are on display in this story. Divinity, obviously, given the authority over death that he has, given his perfect communion with Abba, given the sheer glory that is emphasized, but humanity as well, his physical walking to Bethany, his discussions with Mary and Martha and the disciples, and the emotionally in touch Jesus who's moved to tears. Jesus wept in verse 35, one of the shortest verses in the Bible, not because he was helpless. He knew what he would do. He knew what the Father was doing. Jesus wept really to show us what it means to mourn with those who mourn. And his tears remind us that he is acquainted with our pain and our grief. Jesus willingly enters into suffering and stands shoulder to shoulder with those who suffer. So that's the first point. Second point is Lazarus' resurrection or awakening is a rich metaphor for us to contemplate. Aside from the assurance that the Son of God can overcome the power of death, we could see Lazarus' awakening as a metaphor for our own lives. We are in need of Lazarus experiences as such. Encounters and experiences, big and small, with God that bring us much needed life, but will also awaken us, will also stretch us, will also grow us. If we take the metaphor further, perhaps Jesus is calling you and me today by name. Perhaps there are areas of our lives today that we are happy that they're covered up, that they're hidden away, that they're wrapped away, hidden in some dark tomb. But perhaps we are being called to wake up, to have the light of the world light up those suppressed areas of our life, our heart and our soul. To have our hearts healed, to have our lives restored, to have life indeed to its fullest, or to press into life in its fullest, and to yield to all that God has made you and I to be. To be holy completely, and to be holy, Holy, to trust wholly in the love that God has for you, to follow the life and teachings of this God-man Jesus, to listen as Lazarus did, as Samuel did, as many others have too. The conclusion, as I see it, we see from this story that people, Martha, Mary and the disciples, don't or can't always understand what is going on. And I think it's the same for us. Life can lead us to ask the question, where is God in all of this? I think doubts and questions are healthy. Life is messy and complicated, and at times very painful, but at other times joyful. We need to be able to come to God with the difficult questions and let the life and light flow into the hurt and all the bandaged up areas of our lives. But we're reassured in that we know that He calls us by name. He knows us intimately and willingly enters into the suffering and the pain that we all go through from time to time. I think there's a lot for us to learn from Lazarus, from Mary, from Martha, but especially from Jesus as we follow Him this week. God bless you.